We're getting our first look at the toll the coronavirus could take on the Illinois economy, not just in the short term, but also in the years to come, especially around how much the state budget could be hurting. Joining us now is Professor Ken Kriz from the University of Illinois Springfield, the professor of public administration, also the director of the Institute for Illinois Public Finance. Professor Kriz, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
You guys just put, and I say you guys, there's a big team of researchers and professors alike who have really combed through the numbers here and tried to get a read on just how big and just how impactful the hit would be to the Illinois state budget because of this coronavirus. And I understand that it's been graded if there's a sort of a quick recovery, if there's a slow, long economic recovery, and then how bad does the pandemic get? So give us the full range, or the peak, if you will, of the economic outlook. What are we in for here?
Okay. Well, you know, part of the challenge to do this is that the economic forecasts are really all over the place. So we went forward with 4 scenarios. The first scenario is that this recession would look like other recessions. In particular, the 2007 to 2009 recession. And that follows on the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability when they issued their report, I think about a week and a half ago, they had looked at something like that. But there's also a lot of other research out there that could see it even getting more dire. There are a couple of economists from Australia who've been running this big model since the H1N1 virus in 2009 that kind of predicts what would happen if a pandemic broke out. And they have 3 scenarios. A low severity pandemic where it's very mild, it doesn't spread very fast, the death rate is minor, through a moderate severity up to a severe pandemic where it's widespread, it's a high death toll, kind of the worst case scenario. So they see a recession with a low severity pandemic actually being a little bit less severe than 2008, 2009.
Not by much. It's pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah. So in 2008, 2009, in 2009 calendar year, GDP fell by about 2.5%. And the McKibben and Fernando, it would fall by about 2%. And so that's pretty close to what happened in 2008, 2009. Their moderate severity would be a fall in GDP around 5%, and then the worst case, the lights out scenario, the severe pandemic, it would be a fall of 8.4%, and that's over the course of the year. We already know that Q2 GDP is going to fall a lot more than that.
It sounds like you're saying a life saved is a number of dollars saved down the line too, or to say it another way, the better the state and public health officials nationwide and worldwide do at containing and combating and defeating this virus now, the quicker and the faster the economy can recover. There seems to be a direct link.
There's a link between health outcomes and economic outcomes. There's actually a different team of us that are working on another paper in this series, the IGPA COVID-19 response, that looks at things like reopening the economy. You know, when do we want to start thinking about that? And then you very much get drawn into the trade-offs there, but between the two. Now that trade-off, again, I wouldn't say it's direct. I'd say that there's some linkage. So a direct would say it's 1 for 1. I don't think it's that by any means.
Right.
You know, public health has got to be our preeminent concern. However, there are economic concerns. We would not want to trade off, you know, going until there were literally no cases, until it was totally eradicated. That's probably too much. But going to a point where we can be fairly confident that we've, you know, gone past the apex. We've learned so many great new terms during this crisis. You know, apex. Everybody's talking about the apex event and when it's going to happen. Once we're pretty confident that we've gone past that and we're on the way down, we can start having the conversation about that. And so that suggests to me it isn't a 1 for 1 type of thing, but there is some kind of trade-off that we have to start putting our hands around.
So you've got enough data now at least to have somewhat of a forecast as you look forward. And as you do that, we already know through this stay-at-home order that's going to last until at least April 30th, that we've seen corporate income tax take a hit, sales tax take a major hit, and as tens of millions of people across the country and hundreds of thousands of them in Illinois file for unemployment, that income tax, which is a big leg that props up the state government, it's depleted, or it's drastically reduced at the very least. So how do you factor that in? And to add insult to injury, I mean, the state was just reaching a point where the credit ratings agencies were saying, your budget is slowly but surely, that ship is turning in the right direction. There's starting to be a little bit more reason for optimism. And now this gut punch. How bad is it?
Well, it's going to get pretty bad. Even in the low severity pandemic, which, if you ask me, we've already kind of gone past. Even in the low severity pandemic, you're talking about, if we have a quick recession and a strong recovery, what we call a V-shaped recovery, you're talking about the state losing over the course of the next 2 years about $4 billion in revenue, a little over $4 billion.
Over the course of
2 calendar years. I'm going to talk about it. I'd like to talk about the difference between that and the fiscal year, just to make sure that everybody understands. That's one of the things that makes this just really obnoxiously complicated. But let's talk calendar years for a second, because it's the way economists think. In the next 2 calendar years, we'll lose about $4 billion. If we get to the moderate severity pandemic, you're talking about a loss somewhere in the range of $6 billion over 2 years. And then in the worst case scenario, you're talking about $8 billion in lost revenue. And that's just in the big three. That's just in income tax, individual income tax, corporate income tax, and sales tax.
And how does that account? Is that sort of weighted? I don't know how relevant this question is. I'm sort of fishing here, if it will indulge me. Is that sort of weighted to, or looking at Illinois specifically? Because when you talk about economic recovery, it's pretty widely accepted that the Illinois state economy recovered more slowly than most states around the country after the 2007 to 2009 recession there. Do we expect that same slower rate in Illinois again? Should we expect that again? And does your study account for that?
Our study accounts for the responsiveness of Illinois revenues over time to changes in the national economy. So it's very difficult to kind of put it in terms, because we don't even know how well the national economy is going to recover. And so if Illinois recovers more slowly or more quickly, that's going to affect the relative numbers. But if anybody tells you that they know how the recovery is going to go, I want to know their address so I can go invest money with them, because somebody's going to do very well. There's nobody out there that has good estimates of what the economy is going to do.
Yeah, it is interesting to see that wide range. You mentioned if we get to that moderate recovery, or the moderate pandemic, with a moderate recovery, we're looking at $6 billion over the next 2 calendar years. If we shift that 6 months to fiscal years, that basically eats up all of Governor Pritzker's proposed progressive or graduated income tax. He was looking to bring in about an extra $3 to $3.5 billion a year by taxing people who make north of $250,000 a year at a higher income tax rate. That money, all that extra money that he wanted to spend on other projects, you're saying that hole just got completely wiped out.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if that particular, I don't want to make a direct, again, link between that, but I know that that's the size of the hole. And that, by the way, is very much in line with the estimates that COGFA came up with in like I said, about a week and a half ago. They looked at simply a 2007 to 2009 type recession. They came up with a range of $2 billion to $8 billion. So we're kind of right in the middle of that, which I think is it lends more credibility to what we are saying. and I'm trying to look at my notes here as I'm talking to you. If you get to the worst case scenario, which is where we have a protracted recovery, so we have what we call an L-shaped recovery. We're getting lots of new terminology. We're getting apex, we're getting a V-shaped recovery, or an L-shaped recovery, or even an I-shaped recovery. If you get something like that, it could get markedly worse. You could be talking about tens of billions, multiple tens of billions of dollars. In the worst case scenario, under a severe pandemic with a L-shaped recovery, so a low growth recovery, you're talking about almost $30 billion in lost revenue.
That's an immediate spike down. You're describing an immediate spike down and then a long, slow recovery up.
Exactly. That's the worst case scenario. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know what that's going to look like. That's why we wanted to put out a range of estimates, because, all that we're trying to get the point across is this is going to be a lot of pain, and the state has to prepare for a lot of pain, and there's going to be no real easy answers.
I imagine part of the goal here in putting together these numbers or these early projections, even as they may be revised down the road, but I imagine the goal here was to give state lawmakers some sense of what they have to deal with when they get back to Springfield and they continue their budget making process.
Yeah, exactly. It's to raise awareness. It's to give a sense of an order of magnitude. So this is the possible range of what we're going to see, and this is what you need to be aware of. So I think that the economic picture is going to be a lot more clear, at least in the short run, by probably the middle of May, if not the middle of June. We're going to have a sense of what the downslope looks like, and so we'll be able to tell more about and is the recovery. What do we look like coming out of the recession? We probably won't know that until the fall. And then you have the other specter of, if the virus becomes seasonal and we have to deal with this in the fall again, there could be another hit. And so this is why, again, this entire series that we're putting out is designed to raise awareness of the issues that decision makers have to think about.
Yeah, it's very interesting to count the cost and to consider the toll that it's taking on state governments, and lawmakers certainly have a lot of complicated math problems ahead of them. So you think you want to be an elected official, think again, get out that big calculator and the budget book. They're both going to be quite large. A lot of thinking and tough decisions.
It's going to require some pencil sharpening and thinking about what's out there. I mean, the other thing that there's been a positive event that happened just within the last few hours. The Federal Reserve came out and they're coming out with a municipal lending facility. So this is where the Federal Reserve will buy short-term debt issued by state and local governments in order to help cushion the Fed acting as a lender of last resort. It's obvious if you have this kind of revenue loss, and then I shouldn't ignore the other part of the paper, which projects that we're going to have a lot of increase in spending too, by things like the Medicaid matching expenditures. We know Medicaid expenditures are going to go up, and there's going to be a large increase in that also. So that also needs to be added to the burden of this. So what the Fed said is, we're going to step in, and if you have to borrow in the short term, which we knew we had to given this type of revenue loss, we'll step in and we'll basically buy that for you. We'll provide liquidity by buying these bonds.
So they're throwing a lifeline to local governments there. In the 2007 and 2009 era, a lot of economists and a lot of politicians in Springfield said that recession crimped the state's finances to a degree that local governments ended up raising property taxes. And I don't know exactly the cause and effect there, but over time it was true that consistently local governments did raise property taxes. Does this life raft from the Fed to local governments here in buying some of that debt, Does that change that calculation for local governments on the ground? Is there any reason to believe that property taxes won't feel that upward pressure in this recovery compared to that one from a decade ago?
It does if we have a V-shaped recovery. It does if we have a short-term bounce back. And that's essentially what the Fed is betting. They're betting that this is a temporary event, that things will go back to more or less normal over time, over 3, 6, 9 months. And so by the end of the year, at least, we'll be back to a pretty fully functioning recovery. If it doesn't, this could actually turn out to be a very risky proposition for the Fed. They may end up holding a lot of debt of state and local governments, which may be impaired in their ability to pay it back. And so that's when you'd need to see things like tax increases and massive spending cuts, if that's the case, because they're going to have to make the Fed whole probably in terms of what they borrow.
They're taking this risky bet here, giving a life raft when it's most needed, hoping that we can, at least buying time so that economists and public health officials and everybody can defeat this virus and get the economy back on track.
And the federal government, the U.S. federal government is backing that up. They're providing a guarantee for this through something called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, that they're basically providing a pool of money. I think it's around $450 billion to the Fed to offset any losses that might happen because somebody can't pay it back. So there's a certain amount that's kind of built in. If viewers are familiar with the 2008-2009 crisis, this is like a loan loss reserve that a bank might hold, and saying, we know that a certain part of the loan portfolio is probably not going to pay off, so we're going to set aside some money right now in order to do it. So that's what the federal government did. Now, they're betting that those losses are going to be minimal. So setting aside $450 million on a $500 billion plus portfolio is not allowing for there to be a lot of loss there, but there's still something there to kind of back it up. There's real dollars there.
All right, it's fascinating to see. These aren't just uncharted waters, but truly some of the economic forecasts are off the charts. So with the jobless numbers, some economists are saying we just don't have the data or projections to work with because we've never seen this before. So they can't use their usual models. So they're looking at things like electricity usage in different parts to see how active the economy is. I mean, was there any part of that for you as you look at the numbers and try to build these projections? Were you able to use the typical old algorithms, or did you have to get creative in any of how you had to put this together, just because of the nuance and the rare circumstance that we're in here?
Well, for this one, again, what we did is we relied on other economists who've been modeling this for several years. Again, as this data starts to roll out and we begin to see it, that's the type of analysis that we'll probably be doing in May and June, once we know this. So I actually built an economic index several years ago I used to live in a different state, and we actually did use our electricity data as part of our index. But it is recognized that it kind of goes outside of the normal bounds of what people usually do. But the point here, I don't know how much time we have, but one of my favorite movies, not necessarily because of the political content, but the drama, is The Day After Tomorrow. And there's a point in it where the paleoclimatologists say, well, none of the existing forecast models work, and so we have to rely on something from when the dinosaurs roamed. We have to rely on something that's totally untested. That's really where we're at. We are relying on things that we never thought we were going to be able to measure or need to measure. So I just saw a paper where they looked at geospatial data. So stuff with how full parking lots were, to try and get a sense of how many people are really working from home. Cell phone data to try and figure out whether social distancing is actually being taking place. Things like that. There's some other measures I can't think of offhand, but people are looking for any types of clues that might be out there about what's going to happen.
Well, and certainly this study is a big start. It's a big mile marker on the road to recovery, at least in measuring this first crater in the economy, and then going from there. It's going to be interesting to see kind of how these numbers start to shake out as we get closer to a full accounting of the impact here.
Yeah, I agree. And then, one of the things that I've always tried to stress is, we will find a way through this. Somehow we will all find a way through this. What I hope is that this teaches us some lessons going forward. Illinois was in a particularly precarious position. Like you mentioned, our bond rating was really low. We had $137 billion in pension debt. We had a bill backlog, which had been paid down by issuing long-term debt, but was starting to grow again. We had no effective rainy day fund in the state, and in fact, we had a negative fund balance in our general fund.
You keep saying had. We still have all those things. Those problems haven't gone away.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, it makes us more vulnerable to things like that. So I hope the lesson that we all learn is that these are things that we have to deal with. The state of Washington, for example, they took $200 million from their rainy day fund and put it to use to try and offset at least some of this. Now, these numbers are so big, it wouldn't have made a huge difference. But it still does make a difference in terms of what's out there. That's why you have a rainy day fund. That's why you carry a positive fund balance.
For moments like this.
Exactly. Going into this, Illinois was in one of the worst financial conditions of any state in the nation. And so, yeah, if things go right, we could have been okay. But things, as we've seen, do not always go right. And this is exactly why we need to learn our lesson and do some of the things like passing a budget that's truly balanced, not just balanced, because of we managed to get some extra revenue in, but one that addresses our long-term funding issues and long-term liability issues. One that's honest in terms of its revenue forecasts, and one that tries to pay down our short-term debt through paying down the bill back.
If I'm listening carefully and closely and hearing you correctly, it almost sounds like you didn't quite think Governor Pritzker's first budget was truly balanced, not in the definition that you just gave, because it had that benefit of the extra revenue coming in, and some critics said the revenue forecasts weren't entirely precise. Did you think Governor Pritzker's first budget had some convenient variables that saved it in the end? Was it truly balanced?
I'm not here to address any type of particular political person.
But just from the analysis side of it, yeah.
Yeah. The one area that I've done a lot of research in, and I've done professionally also, is in the pension fund area. And the original budget proposal was to re-amortize the pension fund debt over a longer period of time, essentially pushing the costs out and not really making the full payment that would have been due under the Edgar ramp.
That was the plan that he was able to avoid when all that extra money came in last April.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when that extra money became available, then they didn't have to go to that. I've got another white paper. It's available on our institute's website, where I look at some of the assumptions that go behind not only the state, but more importantly, all the local government pensions that are out there. And if we apply what I think are more realistic assumptions to things, the situation now appears to be even probably worse than it would.
Professor Kriz, a lot of interesting information. The universe of information is growing larger as we speak, as we're all looking for new ways to measure this crisis. But thank you for signing on. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to keeping in touch as we move forward. Stay safe.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Wish you all the best. Everybody stay healthy and stay at home.
All right, we're back in just a moment.